Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With. It's an audio interview series presented by WFPK, Independent Louisville, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Wherever you're listening from today, please do hit the subscribe button. And if it's a place where you can leave a rating or a review like iTunes or Podchaser, go ahead and do that as well. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today my guest is Israel Nash. He's back with a brand new record called Lifted that is steeped in the 1960s, inspired by bands such as the Beach Boys and the Beatles. He calls it a modern-day hippie spiritual. We get to hear about all the reasons why all of that is what it is. We're also going to hear about the studio he did it in, the studio that he actually built with his own two hands in Dripping Springs, Texas. We'll talk about Texas and American politics, how it relates to the area that he's in right outside of Austin. It's Kyle Meredith with Israel Nash.
Your new single is so good, and I want to give you that compliment right at the beginning. We've been fans for a while, but I don't know. There's something extra special about this one. I don't know if it feels that way. Usually, an artist, the newest song, they're like, "Yeah, this is my best thing." But does this feel like something extra for you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a lot of unique things for me in this time period, from like external things to like personal or spiritual things to kind of all kind of act in concert to make an album. It's like I have the studio space, and like I feel like I know a lot more behind the board and stuff now at a production kind of level, and like know what I can hear stuff and know how to achieve it a lot more easily than I could back in the day. And then just kind of being at a piece and just like lyrically kind of hitting on some bigger questions that I've kind of gone through over the last couple of years, just questions of humanity, purpose and the point of this whole thing. And, so I think it's been a time to really kind of focus those on an album. So then whenever you hear that come together musically and lyrically, what becomes song and records, yeah, it's a very special point to me. And it's an intimate thing, and it's just kind of using all the resources I have out here now. Like making a record out of my house, but I have a studio and the ability to kind of do stuff that I couldn't do before,
Those big questions that you were asking, how much of that has to do with, the politics of the world and just news of what's happening out there, and how much has to do with age and getting to a certain point?
I asked the same question, where it's like, I think that it's a combination of, age. I think it's experience a lot, and I think experience generally favors the older because they've had more of them. But sometimes when you're younger, you get great experiences. And I think for me, traveling, touring, and playing music, sharing that with people, but like getting out on the road and like, being in Europe and seeing, hey, all these people like music too. They have a different culture that they're making things work. It's that kind of stuff that I think opened me up even more to kind of put like my progressive ideals to test, where it's like you're in the world, it's like I lived in New York and then I went out into the world and the music took me to all these places that introduced me to people doing different things and people that maybe don't look like us or have different ideas, but they're just wonderful humans that connect this world. So, music has brought me that experience and a little bit of age there too, but yeah, just realizing the purpose of my music is to satisfy something in me to release and connect to the world, and like almost I've realized it's kind of a meditative state that helps me kind of be in the now and be more mindful and kind of get my feelings across. But then moreover, I get to share that with a lot of people, and that becomes my present in itself, is the sharing of people, because it gives me a reason to go out and see them and to go out into the world and not just be holed up in Dripping Springs. It's like I love my ranch and I love living in the country, but it's the duality, it's the yin and the yang that I need. It's like isolation here and then getting out in the world.
Tell me more about Dripping Springs, because this is about half an hour, 45 minutes outside of Austin?
Yeah, it's about 30-40 minutes outside of Austin, right down 290, and you go 1,400 feet in the air. Once you leave Austin, just keep climbing to what is called the Texas Hill Country, and Dripping Springs is the gateway to that, and then it just kind of extends past like San Antonio and further out west. But they call it like west of weird, and it's like it's an interesting town. It's very rural. There aren't like a lot of like subdivisions or modern kind of living situations. That's kind of changing more recently. But a lot of people have land, and have 5, 10, 200 acres. and I just fell in love with it because I grew up in the country in Missouri, and I knew after New York that I wanted to live in Austin and around that music area, but wanted to furthermore live in the country to make art and to live, and we found this place, and it's 1,700 people. You know, it's like there are just cool people that live out hidden in the hills you wouldn't even know, you know, just people building stuff, other artists making things, craftsmen, just really interesting, you know, people I think kind of come out of Austin from here. People come here from California. You know, you get some interesting kind of folks that live out here for a Texas rural town. It doesn't necessarily feel maybe what you would judge or think about as like a small country Texas town. So it's got a lot of life and a lot of beauty, and just you can, from my place, you can see hills for like 30 miles in the distance, and you just feel like you're on top of the world kind of, but also just isolated to your own part of it, you know.
I mean, there is the sort of what you're getting to there, the great contradiction of Texas and America, the history, the perception, obviously the politics, which, you know, when you're that close to Austin, which is a very liberal side of it, you have a very small pocket, you know, within the state. Do you find yourself being faced with that clash otherwise? Because Dripping Springs actually sounds very idyllic otherwise.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I mean. I feel like the town has so many people that are kind of like Austin, like expat or kind of types like that already. So, yeah, I haven't really felt like that. I mean, like I said, there's just cool people doing cool stuff out here, and so you see the reach of Austin. You see this area of Texas in general kind of being an extension from Austin, and kind of therefore kind of championing some of the same stuff. Like, it's not like Dripping Springs is some huge music town, but they love their musicians, you know. It's like, you know, I got to do like the talent show at my daughter's elementary school, you know. Me and Ben Queller were doing like judges for Walnut Springs Got Talent, you know. So, you know, it's cool to live in a small town and be an artist and have some fans and, you know, talk about your small town. Because I love Austin, but I always like to make sure, hey, I live in Dripping Springs, though. You know, it's like, let's talk about that. So I always make sure there's room to talk about Dripping.
Now, did you build a whole studio? Is that what I'm guessing? Because I feel like that's actually a big part of the story of this record, is your studio.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I built this studio like 2.5 years ago after we had bought this place. You know, it's kind of always a plan, like fix the house up, and now it's like, is the house good enough now so I can build a studio, honey? You know, like, so can you forgo like that, you know, the kitchen remodel? So yeah, we started building that, and that was just a work in progress. And I recorded my last album, Silver Season, in there, but that story was kind of like, the studio was being built. Like, the studio didn't have AC, it didn't have running water, it had tarps on the side of it. It was like way behind schedule when we made a record in it. And the story became the amazing unity of friendship and band and longtime pals that got through the mud and crazy storms. But this was, you know, less romantic and like that kind of level. This was like the studio. This record was the first time that I've been able to write in it, that it's been a studio where you open the door and it's a studio and you can make records, you know. So that's changed everything for me, you know. I mean, I'm writing and recording a lot more, and I'm kind of like calling it this like farm to table rock and roll, you know, or write a song out here in the country, record it, and guess what? You can release it, you know. Like, it's that easy. Yeah. So it's just an exciting time, you know.
Yeah, and that might go into, you know, what the record's already been called, maybe by you, maybe by your publicist, I wasn't sure, but a modern day hippie spiritual. Like, like, what is that?
Well, it's funny because, you know, I'm a big advocate. It's like of sharing, like getting people to work with me that, yeah, they can take some direction or some ideas from me, but then also that they can do, obviously, stuff that impresses me and takes my stuff to another place, you know, and that's the beauty of community. And like Tom, who did our art design packaging, you know, I gave him all these references. I try to give a bunch of like verbal kind of references to paint pictures and get kind of people excited when we're working. And he was like, I told him all this stuff, you know, about that it's a place for me of kind of coming to a new chapter in my life and how I view my responsibility to the world around me. It's a place where, you know, I wanted, in the craziness of political, you know, currents and the reality of civil injustice and stuff that can keep you awake and worried for the rest of your life, and there are real valid concerns in my life and should be and people should be aware. But I also wanted to take an opportunity to make an album that can maybe transcend some of that stuff and kind of like what I was talking about, just the human connection and spirit and things that are maybe more important than even our institutions or our words or this world, you know. So Yeah, I think that when I explained that to Tom in these kind of flowery terms, to see what it stirred from him, and he just like sent back the first version of the album cover, and it just had on the top of it "File under Hippy Spiritual." So it was perfect because I also told him where it's like, I have all these ideas and these feelings, but I don't want it to be so like hoodoo voodoo, like too weird and like too crystals and oils or something. It's like, I want it to be like a good message, just a solid message. And so I thought that was a cool way to kind of present it. It's kind of, we like some of the spiritual realms, but we also like hippie ideas and psychedelics, long hair and rock and roll. So
musically, it does dip a bit into, what we recognize from the 60s. Is that coincidence, or does that purposefully play a part in this?
I think that it was purposeful for sure. I mean, a lot of the inspiration I had on this album were like some classic records like Sgt. Pepper and, Pet Sounds, like, and not just so much of like trying to make songs like the Beatles or something, but just being moved by the production and just realizing that these were like records that these artists made in some kind of like pinnacle point of their career where they had resources and creativity, to be able to take time to make things. And, I don't have all the same resources as my heroes, but due to technology and, affordability, we have so many resources as indie artists and stuff. And now I've got a studio, and that's kind of what those albums did. It's like kind of using the studio as an instrument. Mm-hmm. So I think that there was a lot of inspiration on that. I was reading anything I could find about any of these kind of sessions, like any kind of video. I was printing out of like print books on PDF, bootleg books off the internet, just to try to understand, not exactly like, I'm not caught up in all the, you've got to do this and this and this, and that's the only way to make it sound good, or this is the only way to live life, this one thing, but just to more get the mindset, and it just kept on leading me to think that it was about freedom of creativity, and access to many things. So this record, I spend a lot of time gathering crazy sounds from the land. I did tons of field recordings, like banging rocks together, pouring water on the limestone. Like we get all of our water out here from rain collection. So the rain hits the roof and goes into a tank. That's how we get water. So it's also awesome for reverb. So throwing drums and stuff in there. And so I just went on the land and made a bunch of sounds and then brought them back into the studio and made them accessible to keyboards and stuff. So people could play keyboard, and that's like a rattlesnake. Hit the middle C, and it's crickets. Hit low F, and it's a thunderstorm that I recorded out here. So trying to get these sounds that felt like a part of where I live, because these songs are about my life. But that was that element of just kind of finding these crazy kind of things, just Leslie cabinets, just any kind of thing that I could find that made noise, because that's all records are, right? I mean, it's a bunch of cool sounds. So it's like, how do we get these sounds? How do we find something and give a freedom to the players just to pick up stuff? And so we had this sign on this table, and it was called the Crazy Table, and it just had bizarre things. And we had water. It was pitched water, so it's like we had this is the G and F and C water glass over here, and I mean, it was fun. It was just creative and let people kind of go places. So that inspiration was definitely probably the biggest element from some of those records, was that freedom to do that. And I think there's also that element where I finally got a record that I could have some strings and horns. Isn't that something that every artist kind of wants?
Right.
I think. So I was excited to have that. And I felt I think all that stuff goes into that sort of production. Some of the I was kind of really, I'm still just really into the Phil Spector Wall of Sound stuff, and there was strings and horns all on that, and that's what kind of Spector did, was the first one to really use the studio as this instrument that you could kind of do more stuff, So I was really, and that's what Pet Sounds. Brian Wilson was trying to emulate Phil Spector for Pet Sounds, and then you got All Things Must Pass, which is another Phil Spector co-produced thing, But it's I was just really inspired by these studio things. So there's not one single guitar on here that is just one track. It's we doubled up, tripled up some parts, and just really trying to make a sound. So I guess it's the hillbilly Texas, wall of sound, the hill country wall of sound,
And we should give some attention, because a lot of those sounds are the horns and strings. It's folks from Grupo, Fantasma, and Wild Child, right?
Yeah, and that's the other great thing about Austin. It's a music city, so you got some amazing people around here and friends. So we had done the arrangements, and I just reached out to some of these people and was like, hey, you want to get in here and do some strings? And we did the strings after kind of the main tracking. But yeah, that was just so smooth and just kind of added that extra thing. And it's like I had read this quote by George Martin, and he said that no one would even think the Sgt. Pepper was the same record without these strings on it, you know, like. So I was excited to get that and have our Austin kind of family and friends be a part of that still.
I love the way it sounds. Are you able to incorporate that stuff live? Are you going to be bringing some of those sounds on the keyboard, the crickets and the rain and stuff?
Yeah, that's what's exciting about this period is really, because that was the other thing. When I made the record, I didn't want to. I think there's a kind of a tacit thing among artists where it's like do stuff that you can pull off live, and then I think that kind of changes the shape of the record. Like too many rules. Let's just make a record, and then we'll figure out how to pull it off live. Because we all know that live is a different show anyway. I mean, it's recorded, the microphones, it's a completely different environment. It has so much more energy. I mean, it's always going to be different. So I'm always accepting that I'm not ever trying to do the same thing as the album. But there are some key sounds in here that I think are really fundamental. So that's what we've been doing, is just kind of working on, like, how does that show really come together nicely. So I have this vision of, like, bringing some things from the land that we kind of, like, would use and making some of these sounds live, like looping, making our own loops and stuff live with some of this instrumentation where there's almost this kind of like this visual, kind of organic, overwhelming kind of aspect of the show. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting time trying to figure out how to get all these sounds. And that's what's also interesting. Some of these albums that I'm citing, they didn't play these records live, right?
Right.
And because they had limitations. So we have like utility guy, like my pedal steel player. He's going to handle some more sounds. We're going to have just weird things and just see how it goes. And kind of every man is responsible for more than one thing, more than four things probably, so that, foot pedals that make synth string noises or stuff like that, I mean, the guitar pedal land is insane now, so yeah, that is becoming fun in itself because it's reconstructing it not in the same way that it is on the album exactly, but giving it, reverence and respect. Hey, this sounds like the album. So it's the other hat that you got to wear. The studio is one thing, the live is another thing, and we have to be progressive and like working on all those. I think as artists.
I love what I've heard so far. I can't wait to catch a show. I'm definitely going to do that. I'm such a fan of this record. I love what you're doing, what you've done. So congrats on that, Israel, and thanks so much for talking to me today, man.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. And yeah, there are nine more tracks to play, so I can't wait to hear more of them.
Awesome, and we'll see you when you get back around our parts.
Awesome, thank you. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks so much to Israel Nash for that call right there. The new album, Lifted. You can subscribe to Consequence of Sound's YouTube channel to keep up with your favorite artists and interviews. Or if you're listening to the podcast, iTunes, Podchaser, wherever you're listening from, give us a rating, leave a review. And then you can head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.